Once you've done that, or not once you've done it, because that's a progress of maybe 2 weeks of work there, to do it gently with the soil. Obviously, you want to know now, well, I need to get my seed, and they're going to take maybe a week to be delivered. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, the delivery services will be intact by the time you need the seeds. Mm-hmm. I know they're still working very well right now, because I just got my seed order and nutritionals and things delivered. So you want to look at what crops do you want to grow. Okay. So some people would go, well, what are my favorite crops that I know my children will eat and I will eat? And then others might say, well, what are my most beneficial crops in terms of my health?
Right. Okay.
So depending on that, we have to then go, okay, do I want to nourish my whole being? So I will have to grow root crops, leaf crops, fruit crops, and some people love having, flowers in their salads. The flowers are great anyway for the beauty and for our joy in the garden. It's great for the insect life. So you want to select from those the ones you want to grow.
Or you may want to think about productivity as well, I guess. I think in terms of planting a carrot or something, what you're going to get out of one seed and at the time that it takes to grow and so on is going to be a lot less than if you plant spinach, for example, that is going to keep growing and growing. Right? So you may want to think about that vein as well.
So you have to start thinking about a couple of things. Some crops are more long-standing. We call those main crops. Some crops, they grow very fast, like your spinach or radishes or even lettuces, for example. And some crops you can keep harvesting if you know how to do it. And you could have them for a long time. Even like lettuces, if you just harvest the outer leaves, or Swiss chard, or like you said, spinach, if you just harvest the outer leaves, then you don't cut it, it will keep growing if the growth point is intact. So according to that, I would say, irrespective how big your garden is, if you decide you want to have the best leaf plants, the best root plants and fruit plants to start with, which fruit plants would be, tomatoes, courgettes, cucumbers, peppers, aubergines. But having said that, I have to put a caveat there. In the English climate, you probably will find the only crops that do on a regular basis well outdoors are the cherry tomatoes. And anything else of the tomatoes and the nightshade family and cucumbers, other than gherkins, the tiny ones you can pickle, or the smaller cucumbers, which are Market Master or the 8-inch cucumbers. Anything else you would have to grow under cover, and they take a lot of space.
Yeah, so I've grown courgettes before, and they the plant takes quite a lot of space because it kind of expands quite a lot. I did get quite a few courgettes though.
Yeah,
and it not covered.
Well, courgettes are probably also an exception. As I said, cucumbers I would be careful with, particularly the salad cucumbers. But generally, if you have a wet summer, they usually die off from mold. You find the same with courgettes. If they're sown very early, they will die off with mold in the middle of summer when it gets very wet and cold. So usually it's good to have 2 successions. I mean, courgettes can be grown outside. Yeah, quite right.
Yeah. Okay.
If it's not the yellow variety, if it's the green variety.
Okay. So we've got the plot. We have now decided what we're going to plant. What kind of seed and where do we get it from?
Okay, so if you want to make a choice of seeds, I would say if you want to work biodynamically, get at least organic seeds, if not Demeter certified seeds that are grown by the seed co-op and seed cooperative. You can Google it, seed cooperative, and I would say it's here in England, as far as I know.
All one word, seed cooperative.
Yeah. And then just Google that.
Okay.
Yeah, go into their website and you order your seed online. You have a huge choice of varieties, both of vegetables, flowers, green manures. They don't have so much available. You might have to Google that separately from organic suppliers. There are quite a few in Britain. But I would say they have the most reliable seed in terms of germination, viability, and also yields under a biodynamic management, even organic management. They're very highly cropping. You will need less manuring and fertilizer for those than if you would grow conventional seed, for example, that you just buy in the hardware shop or offline. And I won't mention any names.
Good. Okay.
But I will recommend the seed cooperative seed because I have used them for years and I can highly recommend those. I have no relationship with them other than teaching biodynamic gardening and farming.
Okay. Okay, so again, we've got the land, we've got all that. Now we have ordered our seed and it will come in the post or something like that. When we are going to grow the seeds, I mean, would you plant them straight into the soil? Would you plant them somewhere indoors? Would you plant them in some sort of bought compost, or would you just, how would you go about that?
Yeah. So depending on what you have available, if you just got pots available on the windowsill or on the terrace, wherever on your paved over areas, because you don't have enough land or soil, proper soil, I would say you probably best off to get some bought in potting compost that is specified. I would go for the organic. There's organically certified composts available, and mix that with a bit of soil if you can get hands on soil that you have, or old compost that you might have hanging around, or leaf mold. Mix it a bit. I would even look for some sharp sand from the builder's yard. Get a bag of sharp sand, not builder sand. The sharp sand is like bigger particles. They create drainage, and mix that in, at a ratio of a third of your bought-in compost, a third of soil, and a third of sand, and put those in your pots.
And soil could be soil from the garden that you've just dug.
Well, if you, for example,
So one third would be the organic compost that you buy in a shop.
Yeah.
The other third would be soil from your own garden, and the other third would be the sharp sand. Okay.
That's right. So that would be very rich mix that would, as long as you water regularly, because that's the other thing that we haven't mentioned earlier, you got to be really sure about your water source. Ideally, you have rainwater collected. It's the best source for watering your plants. If you can't get hold of that, it would be good to have some container that's big enough, like a barrel or something, to fill with your tap water. And you're probably all aware that tap water has chlorine. And chlorine, particularly for legume plants, tomatoes and so on, the more sensitive plants, they will suffer and not yield very well if you water them with that water. So if you fill the barrel and let the chlorine evaporate for half a day or a day and use it from there, it's much healthier for the garden and the soil life, particularly if you work biodynamically, organically, you want a rich soil life. Chlorine, what does it do in the drinking water? It's supposed to kill all the bacteria, fungus, and E. coli, what have you. And it does the same in the soil around the plant roots.
Yeah, okay.
So it's very important to be aware of that.
Okay, so we are growing in pots, basically. We make that mixture of one third, and one third. Are we putting it in layers, or are we just mixing it all together?
All just mixed together.
Okay,
of course, if you've got a few stones or old pots, crockery or whatever at the base for drainage would help. But generally, a pot is usually so well drained anyway, you don't need to worry. Particularly for vegetables, it's not such a big deal. Okay. And then you asked about outside. If you have your garden plot like you have your land with the soil dug over, you will then have to, I would say, divide your plot into 4 to establish a little crop rotation. So, for example, the root crops don't need barely any manuring because their roots are very deep and they have very tiny leaves and big roots, so they don't need a lot of fertility in terms of nitrogen. So I wouldn't give them necessarily a lot of compost. I would, what I'm doing when I sow root crops in that 1/4 of your area, I take the spade and open trenches like V's, like that. So I put in the spade, push the soil to either side, and open like a slot, and I insert the compost there so I can sow on the compost. And then when that's nice and moist, after moistening that really well, watering it well, I sow in there my little seeds. They will germinate very readily outdoors, and the roots will grow very quickly deep into that compost and then find their own way into the other soil, which has got no compost, and you grow a really rich root crop in that way. For other crops, like the shallow rooting plants, like the onion family and the cabbage family, I would surface compost, say 1/2 inch compost for all the medium heavy feeders like the onion family and the Swiss chards and the spinaches, and maybe 1 inch for the cabbage plants. And then you have to hoe that into the soil with a hoe, or fork it in with a fork, about 2 inches, I would say, 5 centimeters. And then once you've done that, you can either sow those plants directly, or you have already started them off in the house on the windowsill. Because one thing, as you said earlier, with the sowing, you want to be aware, some plants are not frost hardy, and other plants are more frost hardy. But usually young plants are not as frost hardy as older plants. And some we call tender annuals, which are mostly the fruiting vegetables, but also, for example, Swiss chard and celery plants and celeriac. They don't like having early frosts. So if you sow those too early outside, they just bolt. You won't get a crop. So it'd be an idea to sow them in seed flats in the house, or in a greenhouse, or in a cold frame. So you might have, if you have enough space, a cold frame outside, which is a wooden box, a frame with an old window over it or something that you can regulate the warmth in there. And you sow in there, and you can sow much early. Usually you gain 1 month to 1.5 months by sowing under cover or indoors. But then often it's a bit more work, because you have to then sow in a smaller flat or box. And then once the seedlings come up, you transplant them into a bigger box with a richer mix. So you have to also make your own soil mix, or potting mix as it's called. And for that, again, you have to have a very nice, well-rotted, humus-rich compost, or leaf mold, sharp sand, and the soil from your garden, just what we described earlier for the planting in the pots when you start sowing indoors. And I would say outdoors, you could sow anything right now. The radishes, the turnips, the sweets from the cabbage family. You could sow definitely all the spinaches. Now, it's still frosty in the morning, so you can't sow any of the plants I've mentioned are tender. You could sow peas, you could sow broad beans still. You could, it's a bit late for planting garlic, but if you have onion sets, or you want to sow onions, perfectly good. You could sow all the root crops, so carrots, parsnips. We've mentioned already the radishes. What else is there? The turnips we mentioned also, so that's all the root crops. You could start sowing all the cabbage plants, like cabbage, broccoli, the early ones, cauliflower, kale, outdoors. They will come up in 10 days with this weather, with the warm sun, even there's frost. They will come up, and they're a bit more frost hardy, so no problem with those. And anything that is fruiting plants, like the tomato family or the cucumber family with your courgettes or whatever, I would sow those indoors, or wait until beginning of May, middle of May, outdoors.
Right. Okay. Okay. So I'm just aware that sort of we still have a little bit of time, but essentially I'm thinking so far we've given people we've taken them through choosing a plot, working on the land, digging taking the turf off, creating the structure of how you want to do the beds, raised or not. We've also ordered some seed. We have decided whether we are planting outside or we are planting indoors. So that would take people, there would be work there for the next couple of weeks, if not more, in terms of waiting for some seedlings and all that to come out if you plant them indoors. I guess the next step would then be to, if you've planted indoors, to then begin to plant outdoors. Or if you've already planted outdoors, then you already get something. So I guess in the next few videos that we're going to be creating, I mean, do you suggest that people create a compost pile, they make their own compost?
Absolutely, we have to think of compost piles. The one thing I would also add right now, working the garden biodynamically, I would certainly order from the Biodynamic Association, which you can Google, just putting in Google Biodynamic Association UK. Mm-hmm. You can order your preparation to encourage the plants that you're going to plant to root more deeply and root faster, and also to activate the soil life to nourish the plants, because we don't want to fertilize the plants. We want to actually nourish the soil life to release the nutrients for the plants, and that creates the most nutritious plants, which is different from organic farming, where we're still feeding the plants rather than the soil. With exceptions, there's many organic farmers that are realizing they have to feed the soil now and regenerate the soil. It's called regenerative agriculture. But so I would say, get yourself a horn manure preparation from the Biodynamic Association and start applying it right after digging on the land to start that process in the soil to activate the soil.
So you get this directly in the soil, not even in the compost pile.
So what you would do with that is you get a lump of prepared cow manure that's very rich in microbial life and life forces. You probably, for your garden, would have to take from that unit that you would get a tenth.
Right.
So it's like a few grams.
Yeah.
And stir that in a warm water, preferably rainwater, of a bucket of 5 liters. Maybe put 3 liters in a 5-liter bucket, and then you start in vortex fashion, bringing that water into a vortex. One way, you have to vortex, you stop the water and rotate the other way, the opposite way, and you do this for an hour. So for those who are a bit anxious and impatient, this is a wonderful exercise in doing an active meditation. Once you stirred it, and you usually do that in the afternoon, preferably on a cloudy afternoon, you then sprinkle it in droplet form on the ground.
All of it, all 3 liters?
Yeah. Just go over it, sprinkle in thick drops. In the afternoon, wet the ground. Sometimes you'll find it will start raining. You influence the weather with this. Some people call that white magic. I call it alchemy. I call it working together in harmony with nature to augment nature's powers, because we're very influential in that way. And we can literally, for our garden environment and our microclimate, create a micro influence, so to speak, as one person, create a whole just with a little garden that you got, help to balance and create a homeostasis for the weather by using these preparations, and help the plants to grow better and us to be more nourished. So biodynamics is phenomenal with that, in that respect.
Okay, so just in case somebody that is listening to us is already getting onto the Biodynamic Association website and going to purchase the cow form, before they just go and do that, are you also going to be recommending that people buy other biodynamic preparations, because they may have a kit or something for I think it's 6 of them, isn't it, or 5 or 6 of them?
Yeah, you've got the field preparations, which is the cow horn manure preparation, and then you got the horn silica, which is then for the ripening process and the maturing of the plants, which comes separately. It's separate units, and we use even smaller quantities.
Yeah.
And then you get the compost preparations. So if you want to order it all in one go, you get one set of compost preparations, which are 6 preparations.
So you
5
got the
solid
yarrow, the
and 1
nettle,
liquid.
and all those.
So we've got yarrow, chamomile, we got nettle, we got oak bark, and we got dandelion and valerian preparation.
And you got
And
all
they're
those in the
very
kit.
easy. And you get those in the kit, one set. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess if people are going to go and order some things, then because you are going to be recommending that people buy all those for their home gardening, then it may be worth ordering the whole thing.
Just the whole set, yeah. And you can get 1 unit of corn silica preparation. Then you're set up in a small garden of the size I mentioned, 100 square meters for the whole year.
Yeah. Do you know roughly what sort of pricing we are talking about?
We're talking in total in the region of £20 or so.
Okay, that's pretty.
And that will replace all your concentrated organic fertilizers that ordinarily a backyard gardener would put on 50 to 100 pounds worth a year to boost the crops.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I'm going to ask you one more question before we bring this to a close, because I'm aware that we have other commitments. And I don't know whether this is the right time in terms of the preparation and so on, but what are we doing about slugs and things like that?
Okay. All right. So that's a whole another subject, which or do we want
to tackle that later on in a different?
I just give a snippet and then we can elaborate on it later. But just to say so much, I mentioned homeopathic preparations before, and the true power of homeopathy is visible when we're starting dealing with insect life and mammals also in the garden that are damaging or imbalanced because there's no wildlife or no predators around. There are precautions we can take on some level with slugs, with soil-borne pests, and also with insects like the butterflies and grubs and flies and so on that are infesting our crops. That is a whole subject in itself we can cover as we get closer also to May, when these things are happening more. But the slugs, they will be an immediate problem as they're waking up now when the frosts are over. So with slugs, we have different ways to collect slugs under boards at night, so we can actually make a ferment with them, which means we have to kill them. Often people throw them into boiling water, which is an immediate death, or I'm usually just squishing them. Or some people can't squish them, they cut them and throw them into the water. And if you do that just before full moon, which is coming up again, we're now, I think we've just passed new moon.
It's new moon now, so yes, it would be a fortnight.
So we'll just, in maybe a week's time or so is a good time to start looking out for slugs, putting the boards down, or putting beer traps. If we can get hold of beer still in the supermarkets or in the off licenses. I hear the off licenses are also selling out.
Right.
But the wood is a safe thing. They hide under nice covered areas which are moist, that's kept shady, and you go in at night and collect them. And then you do your 1 month preparation. So you collect them now. It takes 1 month to actually ferment them. And then you can spray that diluted. It's a very rich fertilizer for the land because it's very rich in proteins, so rich in nitrogen and other substances like potassium, which is often missing in organic gardens and biodynamic gardens. And you spread that over the land and it will deter the slugs. So that's one way of dealing with things, is just fermenting these mammals and creepy crawlies like snails and things. They're all out. And the other one is attracting the birds. So having enough seeds of your wild herbs in the garden, not worry about too many weeds in the garden, because when the birds come to eat the seeds, they eat also snails and slugs, particularly when they're younger. And of course, if we have hedges and other things, we have hedgehogs, they're coming back. We got other wildlife and predators, frogs. If you establish ponds, I highly, highly recommend in your garden have a little corner where there's a little pond. So you have frogs and all the water wildlife, the what do you call them again? Dragonflies.
All right. Yes.
You know, which control most of the insect population in your garden, also aphids that are going to attack your garden. So a pond is a must for birds to drink, for insects to drink.
And do you want the pond near your plot, or?
Yeah, in the same vicinity. I mean, if the neighbor's got a pond, it's good enough.
All right.
But the more ponds, the happier.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
If there's space.
Yeah. Okay.
So creating also a beautiful environment in terms of restoring your wildlife in your area, not just thinking of your own garden. And that will protect your garden in turn.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, so I think that's what we've got time for today, Hans. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. And so just for people to know, what it sounds as though what's coming next is we're going to be talking about compost piles, and we're going to be talking about slugs and insects and so on. Anything else that you've got in the pipeline to share with us?
Well, with all that, we will talk also about plants that grow well together and eat well together, cook well together, because in terms of our nourishment and our taste buds, it's very interesting that will also help, and then that will help also in deterring or preventing pest attack and fungal attack in plants. So it's a wonderful exploration of, you know, the magic in the garden and the wisdom that the plants have if we know how to put them together and let them work with each other as a community. Almost like in a symbiotic way.
Yeah, and I guess also maybe a warning to our listeners that, you know, because the information we've covered will take people a few days, a few weeks even. I don't imagine that anybody will be acting on it right now in terms of planting and so on, but something we haven't covered is when you plant and when you do things in terms of the lunar cycles and things like that. So we probably want to cover that in the next video.
That's another big subject to touch, and we can enter in a very simple way with 1 or 2 steps and then build it up as we go. And I would say in any case, if you do need personal consultation, you can always look me up either on Facebook, Hans-Günther Kern, and send me a message, or I'm also reachable by phone. I don't have a website yet, working on that. And we're also having the Healing Matrix online, where we're going to post soon. So be in touch.
Yes, we will be posting links on the healing. We will be posting on the healingmatrix.online. And so my understanding, Hans, is your idea is that you know, this is general information that people can get and they can benefit from and start acting on from today, and they can start creating their own vegetable garden. But if they want to have a deeper understanding of what things should look like and what a garden should look like and how to do certain things more in detail, so demonstrations of you doing that work in short videos, then they will have access to that, so they can benefit from your experience and seeing you do it as well. So make sure all of you listeners who are there to check the links on our website, and if you want to know more, then click on those. So thank you very much, Hans. We will resume our talk soon and cover the other aspects that you were mentioning and others, I'm sure. And thank you very much, everyone, for listening to this. And I hope you start planting and you start looking after your garden and the earth, and that you have a successful experience of growing your own food, and also you have fun. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Happy gardening, and make use of this good weather. It's fabulous weather for gardening, to be out in the sun and get your extra vitamin D3 and your tan already. So you can only get healthier by being outside, doing exercise and all those things in the fresh air.